Good afternoon. A few days ago, while testing the electrics, I got a warning message on the dashboard saying check trailer turn signal lights, which is a bit odd because I don't have a trailer. But I have realised that the indicators, stop and tail lights in the light bar, which are LED, are actually wired off a trailer interface. Now, the IVECO Daily typically has a trailer interface and a trailer socket fitted by default as standard. I don't know whether it's an optional extra, but this one's got a 13-pin trailer socket tied up under the chassis. And the ECU that operates the trailer lights is notorious for having problems. On the early IVECOs, it was bolted on the chassis behind the near side rear light, and it used to suffer terribly for water ingress. And on this model, or mine anyway, it was under the bonnet. This is the offending article, and on my van it was bolted 2 holes there on a bracket, and it was actually easier to unbolt those 2 holes, the 10mm nuts there, even though it's bloody fiddly because you haven't got very much movement down there, than it was to undo the 8mm nuts that actually mounted it to its bracket. The harness has a plug with a purple pulley out sleeve which allows you to disconnect it. Can I do it with one hand? Yes. That's what allows you to disconnect it. Purple plug goes to the trailer ECU. Plug with the red tape goes out to the rear lights and the trailer. Plug with the yellow tape are the inputs from the whatever operates the lights, body control module or whatever it is in the vehicle. And then there's another plug. Don't know what that one does, not relevant. And then the only other cable is an earth lead. And the resultant plugs and sockets are all down there, all disconnected. So first thing I did was disconnect the ECU, and then via the wiring diagram, there's a wiring diagram there that basically tells you what the various pins do. First thing to do was obviously check there was 12 volts on A1 and B1 and ground on B4 and A4. And then I started testing the outputs and the stop lights and tail lights just by sticking 12 volts on the relevant pins, e.g. B3. Tested the bulbs, or the LEDs rather. But when I came to test the indicators, which are on C6 and C7, nothing happened. Nothing at all. I could measure some current. I saw 1.4 amps being drawn on one of the connections and 0 amps on another, which didn't make sense. And I started to think, when I was taking out Genesis and doing some work around the battery, had I caught or damaged a cable, crushed something or shorted something together? But following the harness back, it does actually just go along the chassis rail. And it runs all the way along the chassis, all the way to the back of the vehicle to feed the lights. So in order to double check the cabling along the chassis, first thing I did was take out this fuel tank. This is the fuel tank that used to be for the generator. I'm going to use this because it's, I don't know, 75, 80 litre tank. That's going to become our grey waste tank. It's also handy because it's got a float in there. Whether the float will work in water or not, I don't know, but it's got a float in there that I can use. Anyway, I followed all the cabling back, and I found they'd spliced the wires into 4 black modules. And these are made by Britax. And all they do is allow you to connect LED lighting to the back of a vehicle that uses the current drawn by a bulb to decide whether the bulb's blown or not. So, although it says flash unit, these can be actually used properly for any sort of lights, but there's 4 of them under there. Common sense says that 2 of them are for the indicators, 1 for the stop lights, 1 for the tail lights. The weird thing is, and it may be a coincidence or it may be an indication there's something else going on, but 2 of these are dead. One of them is completely open circuit, doesn't do anything. The other one still presents 1.4 amp load to the trailer ECU, which emulates a sort of an 18 to 21 watt bulb, but there's no output. It's not switching the output on. And it's only got 3 wires, ground, basically volts in, volts out. That's all there is to it. But I've got 2 duff ones of these. But the weird thing is, under there are 2 more, which I thought one went to the stalk lights, one went to the tail lights. But no, they're not used at all. The wires have been chopped off and spliced together. So I've ended up with 2 spares. And lo and behold, they work. So I haven't got to go out and buy anything. And I'm now going to put the van back together again. And just give you a quick look under the van once I've tidied up the cabling. So there's the module, bolted on its bracket. And as I said, although fiddly, it is easy to get to those 10mm nuts there than those 8mm nuts there. You could probably get a spanner on this one, but the one down there, there's a plate in the way which prevents any kind of, well, none of my sockets would reach, they're either too long or too short. So, bit of a pain. To test it, to test it, obviously I put the headlights in, otherwise I'd have got error messages for those bulbs. Now that I know where this thing is and how to get at it, it's not going to be that difficult if I have to take it apart again if something else goes wrong. But this entire metal front of the vehicle is only held on by 2 bolts and 2 nuts. There's a nut that goes on there, and there's a bolt hole there. And then, take the headlights out, 2 bolts, unplug them, undo the nuts, undo the 3 bolts for the bonnet lock, unclip the bonnet lock, and the whole thing just comes away. And then all this area is accessible. There's no way I could have got to this, even just taking the headlight out. It was difficult to get down there. And I thought maybe I'd have to get the bumper off, because obviously then you can get to it with the bumper out of the way. But it's much easier to just take the grille panel off completely. Right, put the rest of the vehicle back together now. There's all the cable harness just pulled out of the sleeving. And these are the modules, the other 2 that still work. And the 2 that died were bolted up there. And it's simply, as I mentioned earlier, ground wire. Then the green wire is the input from the lights, and the yellow is the output to the lights. And for some weird reason, the other 2 modules that I'm now using, you can see it's only got an earth wire connected to it, and somebody at some point in time has joined the yellow and greens together. And all these yellow and green wires are just spliced into these existing blue wires that originally would have just run end to end and up to the actual trailer connector. And there is the 13-pin trailer socket, which has probably never ever been used, and never will. But they've effectively spliced into the wires that goes to the trailer socket to power the lights and the light bar. But because of LEDs, they fitted these units here. So I'm lucky really, because they're not going to be, well, they're not that cheap. They're anything between 10 and 20 quid, depending on who you want to buy from on eBay for one of these units. I hope the problem's gone away, and I hope these units are physically okay. It may have just been a coincidence that 2 failed relatively close together. The only factor was I had the chassis battery disconnected for several weeks while I was rewiring Genesis. I don't really think that would have anything to do with it, but when I reconnected everything, they just both died at once. So next job is to basically shove all this cable back in the odd bits of tape that I had wrapped around it, get it back in there and make it all look nice and pretty, which I won't bore you with. That's got it all back in situ again. Now to go and test it, make sure it still works. Bingo. There they are working. So that's both the spare Britax modules, which by the way aren't factory fit. These have been added by the ambulance converter. But that's both Britax modules, or the spare ones, now in play, and no more error messages on the dashboard. It's very strange that, although they had different faults, so one was drawing current but not operating the output and one was dead, very strange they failed within days of each other. So we'll have to wait and see what happens next.